The Icebound Soldier. In the main timeline, the resurrection of Captain America is a perfectly timed miracle. In 2011, a Russian oil team out of nowhere stumbles upon the wreckage of the Valkyrie bomber, allowing S.H.I.E.L.D. to thaw Steve Rogers just in time for the Avengers initiative. And who better to place at the heart of a group of heroes than the legendary Captain America? But that was a lucky coincidence. In this What If, that oil team arrives just a few days too late, delayed by a massive sub-zero storm in the vicinity of Steve Rogers' coordinates. The ice shelf violently shifts, the wreckage of the bomber sinks deeper into the freezing depths, and the faint locator signal dies completely. S.H.I.E.L.D. is forced to call off the search, and Steve Rogers is, well, once again, left in a frozen slumber as the world marches on without him. On paper, losing one super soldier doesn't seem like a universe-ending event. Captain America was far from the strongest Avenger, but sometimes you don't need power, you need heart and guts, and someone with enough of both. Someone who would focus on what's right no matter the crisis, and that's who Steve Rogers was. And without him, the Avengers would never become who we knew them to be. Think about Howard Stark. Howard spent his entire life and millions of dollars scouring the ocean floor looking for Steve. He held Captain America up as the ultimate standard, which cast a massive, suffocating shadow over Tony Stark's childhood. In this timeline, because Steve is never found, he remains a permanent ghost. Tony doesn't realize it yet, but that planted a seed of contempt in his head for Steve, one that he never gets to nip in the bud because he never has the chance to meet the man and realize Steve is actually human, more than most people. The Chitauri Invasion. Fast forward to 2012. Loki attacks the Pegasus facility, steals the Tesseract, and forces Nick Fury to pull the trigger on the Avengers initiative without a replacement for Captain America. He hopes that Iron Man can pick up the slack, but let's be honest, he's expecting a pampered, narcissistic billionaire to fill in for a seasoned war veteran with a heart of gold. Then you have the Hulk, who is unpredictable to say the least, a literal alien god, and two elite assassins who are trained to operate strictly in the shadows. But there's no field commander, no moral compass, nobody like Steve who can step up and unite them. During the argument in the helicarrier lab, there is no one to look Tony Stark in the eye and challenge him. There is no one to ground Thor. They are a room full of loaded weapons with nobody to aim them.
Man, what are we, a team? No. We're a chemical mixture that makes chaos. We're a time bomb.
The Chitauri invasion inevitably still faces its equal in the Avengers, but this time, they're not really a team. Who was it that laid out the battle plan? Who was it that assigned each of them a job, worked with the police to set up a perimeter up to 39th Street to keep civilians safe, and fought like hell on the ground with each Avenger? It was Captain America, and you can't have a crew without a captain. The Avengers continue fighting against the Chitauri, disorganized, scattered, and deeply dysfunctional. Black Widow and Hawkeye put up a good fight, but they aren't war generals. With no direction and a seemingly infinite amount of enemies, they're overwhelmed and pinned down. Meanwhile, Thor and Hulk are rampaging all over New York, destroying buildings, dropping lightning, and tearing through infrastructure with nobody to guide them. It's not a coordinated defense. In the middle of the chaos and destruction, Tony Stark is the only one who realizes that this can't continue. And as he sees the ground team getting slaughtered and the civilian casualties skyrocketing, he realizes that he has to step up. He uses Jarvis to run tactical analysis, calculating perimeters and directing the Hulk in real time, all while fighting off Leviathans that quickly overwhelm him. Thor realizes what he's trying to do and helps, and for a moment it seems like they're coming together. Until the World Security Council launches a nuke at Manhattan. Tony still intercepts it. He still flies through the wormhole, but the pressure of New York, the death and the devastation takes its toll on him even though the Avengers still win. With a much higher death toll, the Avengers aren't hailed as heroes, they're seen as destructive, necessary evil that just happens to be fighting for Earth. For Tony, this is a breaking point. In the original timeline, New York already left him with PTSD. Now, Tony absorbs all the trauma and guilt on his own. He leaves New York changed, completely paranoid and scared by what he saw, and burdened by the weight of leading Earth's only defense. The Avengers, an Age of Control. This is a different Tony, one without Steve to keep him in check, to challenge him, one completely consumed by his accelerating anxiety. This Tony, he doesn't debate morality, he immediately builds Ultron. And when Ultron inevitably goes rogue, his lack of Captain America creates a massive tragic ripple effect, specifically when it comes to Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. In the main timeline, Steve recognized that the twins weren't evil, they were just misguided, traumatized kids. He reached out with empathy and convinced them to switch sides, making them Avengers.
You two can still walk away from this.
No, we will.
I know you've suffered.
Maybe in a world where he had Steve, Tony would have done the same. But in this one, he's drowning in a conflict. They're active Hydra assets working with a killer robot. They are a threat, a global one. But they are just kids who are traumatized by his inventions. He has to carry that weight. Tony doesn't go for the kill shot. That's too much even for him, but he does neutralize them. They are immediately neutralized and held in a secure facility taken off the board, and this means that Wanda is never there to rip out Ultron's core, and she never forms a bond with Vision. Sokovia looks like a hell zone, overwhelmed by aliens, and without Wanda, Pietro, and Cap to help the civilians, the casualties once again skyrocket, and Tony is reminded of his failure once again. He thinks about how to stop Ultron, but for once, even his mind is blank until he realizes that Ultron has his ego. First, he attempts to reason with Ultron, offering him safe harbor if he surrenders now, but when that obviously doesn't work, he threatens him with a bluff. Tony has Ultron's kill switch, and if he doesn't turn himself over, he will use it. He provokes him, telling him that no matter how advanced he thinks he is, Ultron can't outwit his maker. Ultron lifts Novigrad up and immediately tries to drop it. Tony and Thor still stop what would have been an extinction event while Vision fights Ultron. Tony's on his last legs. He's been fighting non-stop, but he makes one final push with Thor and Vision and decimates Ultron. But the world's reaction is even more horrible. And this time, there's no Sokovia debate. There's no civil war. There is no Steve Rogers to challenge Tony. He doesn't just agree with the UN out of an increasingly large mountain of guilt. Tony bankrolls the Sokovia Accords, and the Avengers become a heavily militarized, heavily regulated global police force, with Tony acting as the supreme commander, with one condition. Thor must agree to the terms. But why would he? He is a god. His home is Asgard. He has no obligation. And so, Thor leaves the Avengers and returns to Asgard, choosing to live as a free man rather than some government's panic button. In the original timeline, Tony was stopped by Steve from killing Bucky, who had also brought Sam Wilson into the fray, befriending him. In this one, that never happened. There was nobody to stop Tony as he beat down the Winter Soldier, caving his skull in, letting out years of anger and the full weight of his parents' loss onto Bucky Barnes, a moment that forever darkened Stark's image. There was no one to show Sam Wilson he could be more, and he remained a counselor for war veterans. Since Steve wasn't there to catch Hydra's infiltration, Alexander Pierce and Hydra are also able to build Project Insight almost completely in the shadows. When the rot finally bubbles to the surface, it isn't Captain America who uncovers it, it's Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton. The two master assassins realize their entire agency, their home, has been compromised from the inside. But they don't have a Boy Scout to rally behind, and two spies can't take down 3 heavily armored helicarriers alone. So they go to the only man with enough resources to wage a private war, Tony Stark. Natasha and Clint bring the intelligence, and Tony brings the firepower. When Hydra tries to launch Project Insight, Tony doesn't do a subtle undercover takedown. He deploys the Iron Legion to aggressively blow the helicarriers out of the sky. The 3 of them dismantle Hydra, but the sheer betrayal leaves Natasha and Clint effectively homeless, pushing them directly under Tony's newly forming, heavily militarized Avengers umbrella. Meanwhile, Tony sets up his suit of armor around the world, Stark drones patrolling every horizon, every sky, and every country. The Iron Legion becomes a UN-funded global security project that acts as the world's threat response. And Tony, now completely consumed by his need for control and safety, lives full-time in the Iron Man armor. It's been months since Pepper, Hogan, or any of his fellow Avengers have seen his face. He focuses on finding more heroes to add to the Avengers, but this is a much different Tony, and the Avengers are no longer something Peter Parker would sign up for. He cannot, in good conscience, sign up to be a government asset that can't stay on the ground level. He registers as a hero in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s database, but he declines Tony's offer and resources, remaining a street-level superhero until Thanos arrives. The Infinity War. In 2018, Tony's Iron Piece is put to the ultimate test when the Black Order arrives. Up until this point, Tony thought he had successfully built a suit of armor around the world, but he is about to learn that a militarized police state means absolutely nothing against a cosmic threat like Thanos. Tony sends out messages to every available hero on Earth, but he soon realizes that this is a very difficult task. Not everyone agreed with the Sokovia Accords, and not everyone chose to register while staying free like Spidey. A lot of them become the underground resistance led by Daredevil and the Defenders, who are New York's only street-level heroes. Even though they recognize the threat of Thanos, they can't leave their city behind, and Tony can't leave any resources unaccounted for. He tries to force the Defenders into submission, but he soon realizes that these people would rather die than give up New York. Even though he promises them that he will keep the city safe, all they ask is whether or not that guarantee held up in 2012. In Sokovia, wherever Stark's Avengers go, a trail of bodies follows. He agrees to let them operate in New York, but they must do so with Stark's forces, appointing them as New York's first line of defense. While this Tony is a lot more militaristic and on edge, he's not a villain. It's not in his interest to fight with people who are trying to save lives, but that gets put to the test when Wakanda finally opens its borders and Kamartaj reaches out to Tony, both demanding an alliance as a response to the Thanos threat. But Tony has one iron condition: they must work under the UN in compliance with the Sokovia Accords. This isn't something T'Challa or Strange can agree to. T'Challa refuses to hand Wakandan sovereignty over to the United Nations, and Strange refuses to let politicians dictate how magic is used. They are completely deadlocked. Now, Tony has to decide. Does he trust this nation that has stayed hidden for decades, or does he wage a second war on them to bring them under control? Given the situation, Tony realizes he has neither the time or the resources. He accepts a collaborative force with Wakanda and, for once, feels relief. T'Challa shares some of the burden Tony's been carrying since New York. But it's a very fragile alliance. Without Captain America's diplomatic respect, that bridge is never built. When Tony demands that T'Challa and Doctor Strange fall in line with the Sokovia Accords to fight Thanos, they refuse. Steve Rogers was the only man on Earth who could seamlessly command a Wakandan king, a billionaire, and a sorcerer without bruising their egos. Because Steve isn't there to unify them, Earth's defense is completely fractured into 3 separate armies. Tony initially proposes that they intercept the Black Order within an evacuated New York. It's a territory they know and can use against them. T'Challa proposes that they should instead greet them in Wakanda, where they can leverage all of Wakanda's superior advanced technology supplemented by Stark Industries. Tony agrees, but he keeps Doctor Strange on a very tight leash. His argument? He has the Time Stone, and he must be heavily defended. When Ebony Maw and Cull Obsidian arrive in New York to take the stone, they run headfirst into Tony Stark's Iron Piece. But Thanos' arrival exposes the one thing the Avengers would have had with Steve Rogers: absolute trust. Think about the Battle of Wakanda in the main timeline. Why did Wakanda open its borders to the Avengers? King T'Challa didn't do it for the United Nations, and he certainly wouldn't have done it for Tony Stark. He did it specifically because he trusted Steve Rogers.
Seems like I'm always thanking you for something.
And that's not all Steve did. He also fought like hell for Vision, but this Tony wouldn't make that call. He'd be okay with sacrificing Vision if it meant keeping one of the stones out of Thanos' hands. Except, since he never opened his doors for Wanda, he lost the one person who was actually capable of destroying the stones. He tries everything, but nothing is able to harm the Mind Stone. He instead locks up Vision in the most secure and isolated Stark facility possible, while running a race against time trying to figure out how to hide the stone's signature. The second the Q ship breaches the atmosphere, Tony scrambles the Iron Legion. Because Doctor Strange is treating this as a high-level military alliance, he doesn't walk out into the street to fight Maw one-on-one. He is side by side with Tony, going over battle plans and behind several lines of defense. And that means none of the heroes ever go to Titan. Both stones are on Earth. And now, so is Thanos and his entire army. On paper, it's a much better force than the one they actually had. The army we saw at Endgame is instead presenting its first and final stand against Thanos on Earth. On paper, they should win, right? But the fragmentation shows. This is a united front in name only. None of these people trust each other. None of them have a leader they can all respect. In the original timeline, when Steve says the word assemble, an army of Earth's mightiest heroes listen. In this one, there is no one to truly unite them. Without Captain America to stand on the front lines, inspire the troops, and seamlessly unite these massive egos, the defense is completely disjointed. The battle lines fracture. Thanos effortlessly tears through the ranks while constantly looking for the Time Stone and the Mind Stone. Things seem bleak when an unknown force shakes the balance.
Something just entered the upper atmosphere.
Enter the Guardians of the Galaxy. After Thanos sacrificed Gamora, Nebula escaped and contacted Star-Lord. She knew exactly where Thanos was heading, and so the Guardians set a course for Terra. As the shields of Wakanda fall, the Guardians rise. Nobody knows them. They say nothing. There is no communication. But one thing is clear. They are not on Thanos' side. Tony arrives on the front lines with Strange and quickly leads the forces that are left against Thanos alongside the Guardians. But it's not enough. Thanos takes on both Strange and Tony Stark, while T'Challa commands his armies against the Outriders, slowly being overwhelmed. He defeats them both easily with the power of 4 Infinity Stones and rips the Time Stone from Strange's neck.
The greatest weapon.
Bleeding and beaten on the front lines, the Avengers watch as Thanos marches onward, having finally picked up the Mind Stone's signature. Tony questions himself. He did everything right. He gathered everyone he could, took every last precaution, raised the strongest army Earth has ever known. Then why? Why is he losing? And he has no answer. Because the one man who could have shown him how to be a real leader was never there. Before Thanos can reach the stone, he is faced by a blood-lusted Thor, furious over the death of Loki. Thor overwhelms Thanos and nearly takes his life, something that the rest of the troops notice. Every hero tries to rush towards Thanos, making sure that Thor can get the job done, including Tony and Strange. And for a small moment, it feels like they could really win, until Thanos uses the Time Stone to reverse time until before Thor's arrival. With the location of the Mind Stone and the knowledge of what is about to happen, Thanos uses the Space Stone to open a portal to where Vision is. As he decimates every soldier, drone, and Iron Man armor in his way, the Mind Stone is finally his. And so, he snaps his fingers, and Earth loses the war. Endgame. The 5 years that follow the snap completely break Tony Stark. In the main universe, Steve Rogers was the one who kept the world's spirit alive. He ran support groups, he preached hope, he told people that they had to find a way to move on. People don't have that down-to-earth anchor anymore, somebody who is rebuilding their spirit right there with them. But that doesn't mean the Earth is left to fend for itself during those 5 years. Tony dedicates his time to helping the planet rebuild. He funds global rebuilding efforts. He deploys millions of Stark relief drones. The Avengers that remain are exhausted and stretched thin, and they don't have an answer for Thanos until Scott Lang returns from the quantum realm in 2023 and pitches the Time Heist, one desperate final play. Initially, Tony refuses. He finds it too far-fetched of an idea, but eventually he decides to go for broke. And in this timeline, there's no Morgan Stark to drive the conflict for him, to make him think, should I stay here or should I try one last time? Burdened by his overwhelming sense of responsibility, Tony never had time to be a father. And more than that, he never had the desire to. The weight of a daughter isn't something Tony had room for. Tony's relationship with Pepper had become strained. The world might have needed Tony in an iron suit, but all she ever needed was her lover, and Tony was always too disconnected, drowning in the weight of his responsibility and depth of his paranoia to truly make Pepper a core part of his life. He never destroyed any of the suits, despite knowing that that's what she wanted. How could he? It would invite danger, and Tony couldn't have that. In the original timeline, Tony was able to step back because he at least knew there was someone like Steve, and that was one of his most important roles. To Tony, he was somebody to share the burden of protecting Earth with. Every Avenger was, but we all know that Steve and Tony were the de facto leaders. And so, they launch the heist. They get the stones, Hulk snaps his fingers, the dusted half of the universe returns. For a few seconds, there's absolute silence. Then, Scott Lang walks over to the window and sees the birds returning to the trees. The dusted half of the universe is back. A wave of overwhelming relief washes over Tony. For the first time since 2012, he thinks he has finally done it. He finally saved the world. But in the background, 2014 Nebula slips away to the quantum tunnel. She powers up the machine, locking onto the coordinates of Thanos' timeline. Just as Tony is catching his breath, Friday's alarms blare through the facility. She warns of a massive, unauthorized temporal breach. Tony turns in horror just as the quantum tunnel violently expands, and the Sanctuary 2 breaches the atmosphere. Thanos rains fire from the sky as the endgame begins. Tony, Thor, and the newly returned Wakandan and Kamartaj forces fight valiantly, but they are pushed to the absolute brink. Tony throws every single suit of armor, every drone, and every ounce of his brilliance at Thanos. He is fighting with everything he has, proving that even without Captain America, Iron Man is Earth's greatest defender. But Thanos is too powerful. When it comes down to the wire, Tony looks at the battlefield, realizes there is only one way to win, and makes the ultimate sacrifice play. He wrestles the stones from Thanos, says, "I am Iron Man," and snaps his fingers.
Iron Man.
In the world that follows, Scott returns the stones to their individual timelines, but the world is now left without any defense. Tony held the burden of protecting the world for so long that he never planned for what would happen if he wasn't there, and so Earth is left defenseless, with only a few scattered heroes and a legacy of sacrifice, surveillance and control, and a fragile trust between Earth's civilians and its superheroes left in Tony Stark's wake. And that's a wrap on one of the events that kickstarted the MCU. Steve Rogers returning gave the heroes exactly what they needed, a North Star to guide them, and in a world where they don't have that, they go down a much different and much darker path. So what do you think about this what if? How would things pan out if Steve never returned?